Welcome everyone, and I know more of you are joining us, so thank you all for being here and for joining us for what is the launch of Garrison Institute's Forum Series on Social Justice. I'm Jonathan Wiesner. I'm the CEO of the Garrison Institute, and it's my absolute pleasure to host this conversation with Rhonda Magee and Dr. Angel Acosta. And I thank both of you for your time and for joining us. We're very grateful to have your insights with today. So by way of introduction, Rhonda Magee is a professor of law at the University of San Francisco and has spent more than 20 years exploring the intersections of anti-racist education, social justice, and contemplative practices. She is an internationally recognized innovator, storyteller, thought and practice leader on integrating mindfulness into higher education, law, and social justice. Professor Magee recently published her first book, The Inner Work of Racial Justice, Healing Ourselves and Transforming Our Communities Through Mindfulness. Here's the book. And I encourage everyone to read it. We are going to put a link in the chat section of this, which will show you where you can actually go out and buy it. But I can tell you right now that Amazon is sold out, but there are other places that you can go to get the book. And I do encourage everybody to read it. I'm also very proud to say that Rhonda is a member of the Garrison Institute's Advisory Council. Dr. Angel Acosta, for the last decade, Angel has worked to bridge the fields of leadership, social justice, and mindfulness. He recently completed his doctorate degree on curriculum and teaching from Teachers College, Columbia University. His dissertation, which I've started, but Angel, I have not yet finished, explores healing-centered education as a promising framework for educational leadership and development. Angel speaks and consults, and over the last couple of years, he has designed the Contemplating 400 Years of Inequality Experience, a contemplative journey to understand structural inequality. He's a proud member of the 400 Years of Inequality Project, which is based at the New School. And we're hoping to engage Angel in a number of other projects working with us here at Garrison Institute. Before we begin today's conversation, I will go over a few logistical items. We're on a Zoom webinar, so participant audio and video are off. We will reserve time for questions. Please post your questions in the Q&A panel. We're on for an hour today, and we'll respond to as many questions as we can, but please forgive us if we are unable to get to your question. A recording of this conversation will be made available on the Garrison Institute website. The Garrison Institute offers these sessions free of charge as a goodwill gesture to support our community. However, donations of any amount are always welcome. Rhonda and Angel, when we met to discuss the format for this session, you told me that this was an opportunity for two good friends to connect and to discuss the issues that are at the top of our minds today around racial justice. So with that, I'm going to turn off my camera and turn it over to the both of you. And then I will rejoin you for the last 15 minutes or so for the Q&A. So I turn it over to you, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. And of course, just want to give thanks to all of those staff and community members affiliated with the Garrison Institute for this opportunity to be with you all today. We know we don't do anything alone. And so just this, please let this represent a heartfelt thanks and appreciation to the entire team, without whose energy and action we wouldn't be here together. And with that, I want to also just again thank my friend Angel, Dr. Angel Acosta, for being here, for being on the planet at this time, and
Mm.
for being in this conversation here with me today. Hey, Angel.
Hey, Rhonda, I miss you.
Miss you too.
Um, this is we're getting used to the new normal still, doing Zooms, conversations. So just know that in my mind, I'm right there with you, right next to you, just hearing you and seeing you. Thank you to the Garrison for this invitation, and I look forward to having this conversation.
Yeah. So let's just, drop right in. Um, just to say, you and I had a chance to connect about 45 minutes or so ago, and we kind of got the conversation started a little. So I want to kind of just give those who've taken the time to join in with us a little bit of a peek behind that window that, um, Angel and we met some years ago as a result of the work of the Center for Contemplative Mind and Society, an organization that we both were drawn to, whose work these days is very, very integrally focused on and has been for some years um, on helping support bringing mindfulness more deeply into higher education, of course. And so obviously, given our commitments to teaching at university and preparing for leadership and teaching responsibly in these times, we were both drawn to the center. And yet we've kind of gone on to do different things where I consider myself still to be a member of that community. And so I want to shout out to anybody on the call right now who is affiliated with the Center for Contemplative Mind and Society, and encourage anyone who's interested in deepening bringing mindfulness into higher ed to check out that organization if you have not. But that said, I'm here in San Francisco. And Angel, tell us where you're sitting right now.
In the Bronx, in New York City.
New York City. And we are all sitting together in this moment of pause related to the pandemic of coronavirus. And we're starting in this moment to see the interrelatedness, the intersectedness of that pandemic with many others, whether it be police brutality, whether it be radical precarity of our economic system and the way people are being impacted right now by the threat of unemployment and other, direct consequences of the shifts we've all had to take to try to get the coronavirus situation under some control. So I'm feeling a lot of different things right now, my friend, and I just want to check in with you, see how you are in this moment, just really give you a chance to share with us what is top of mind, heart, and spirit as best you might describe it for us from where you sit right now.
Sister Rhonda, thank you for that question. And I think that question is going to allow us to settle into the spirit of the theme of our conversation, not only acknowledging the launch of the social justice strand of the Garrison Institute Forum, but also thinking about inner work and outer work in the context of radical healing. I'm feeling really tender right now. I think the last couple of weeks have been really intense, not just with the 24-hour news cycle and the pandemic, but also the public response to police brutality and the clear continuation of racialized violence. So this week I'm feeling a little tender, but there's something to how we slow down, and so there's something to how I'm trying to hold myself, not just in preparation for this conversation, but also in preparation to be present in my community, in my family, with my wife, with all who I care for, because I'm holding a lot, and so I'm in a really tender place, and so I'm kind of holding a little bit of being brokenhearted, and then also leaving room for joy, and I'm ecstatic to just share this conversation with you, and there's something to bouncing between the heartbreak and the joy that is useful to me and being in that productive tension.
Ah, mm. Whew, I hear you, and I just want to pause in, in real honor of what you're sharing, the naming that you're doing, pointing toward just certain aspects of the kind of the landscape or the mosaic of what you're experiencing, witnessing, bringing, and then holding. So tenderness, heartbreak, joy, right? I think we're all aware of the sort of the green shoots of like, ooh, this is happening in response. That give us a break and away from, the temptation to kind of really be ruminating on some of the really, really difficult images, narratives, responses, reactivity that we're seeing out there and that are coming up in here. So it's, when you describe how it is that you are in this moment, I think it gives us a really, it gives us a real grounded in reality opportunity to reflect together on this work of bringing a contemplative dimension into what it is that we call social justice. And so, for me, that's a very, very deep and it's a lively conversation, right? How exactly to bring these two, what does it mean for me in a very real, lived experience kind of way to explore in my own life, the bringing together of something called contemplative practice and a way of being in the world and a way of relating to realities, multiple complex realities, something called contemplative practice to support a sense of who I am and the self-regard, to use the language of Toni Morrison, how it is that I see myself and that constructedness of the self, that contemplation and contemplative practice helps us see, like we're constructing something there.
Indeed.
That whole aspect, all of that, to bring that together with a kind of almost, for me, very deeply ethically grounded call to do something with this moment we have on the planet. We don't know how long, right? We don't know when the expiration date is for any one of us. So to wake up to like the potential we have in this moment to try to do something to alleviate the structured suffering of others. When I think about social justice, that's what I'm thinking about. Although I recognize an ecology of social justice, it has a personal, some interpersonal, obviously, dynamics and dimensions to it. But it certainly has this sort of social collective. How is it that we set up society in ways that disproportionately render some of us again and again and again more vulnerable?
Yeah.
So looking at that and working to, in some sense, alleviate suffering, personal, interpersonal, and systemic collective, and to resist the temptation to think it has to be either this or that, right?
Yeah.
That for me is partly what I'm experiencing, and that's for me is why when you say tenderness, when you talk about heartbrokenness, when you talk about joy, and almost, I hear you like pointing towards so much.
Yeah.
It all lives in my heart in a very real way, and I appreciate you for naming all of that right here, right now.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sister. Alongside the tenderness, there's this fragility, right, that I feel, in terms of this global pandemic that we are experiencing. And there's a fragility there that, this moment is so sacred for many of us because we're holding on so much. And to honor Sister Toni Morrison and that text that she released before her passing, the sources of self-regard, meditation and other essays, what a wonderful gift. But I think it's good to even reference it again, because I think right now, the impulse for many of us is to care for other immediately. We've seen it with healthcare workers and essential workers, and it's crucial, right? But then the self-regard, right? What does it mean to engage in self-regard in a deep way? And that's why this week I shifted towards really holding myself and tending to my self-regard in order for me to show up to conversations like this with more force, more vigor, more energy, because the tension that you're pointing to is very real. This idea of engaging in contemplation and the beautiful influence of the mindfulness movement of quieting the mind enough, quieting the body enough to listen deeply to our inner landscape. In order to, as research points to, cultivate that well-being, cultivate that sense of kind of almost even euphoria if you practice it enough, and presence. But we know that with the suffering and troubles that are present, we can't stay inside for long. So the classic move, especially in the yoga community, around practicing in the mat, but also outside of it and away from it. So that, that's why I appreciate your work so much, because it invites us to play with that tension. What does it mean to engage in introspection, contemplation, inner work? Yet also let some of that, most of that, be in service of changing the very structures and systems that structure inequality, that continue to displace folks, not just physically, but also psychically, psychologically, and emotionally. So I just thank you, sister, for your book, and I recommend folks to really check it out. So that's my initial response to that first framing that you invited me to think through.
Thank you, my brother, so much. Pausing again, as I will do, to really be present to what I'm hearing in your reflections and what is tapping into in me here. And as we do this, everybody, this is for me a way, and I don't always name it, even if I'm pausing, kind of just to do that in the context of our Western cultural ways of being in language and in conversation is a little bit of disruption, is a little bit of bringing a kind of inflection point, a kind of a shift right into this moment, right? So when we talk about contemplative ways of being, it is something that's, again, very real for me. I'm a law professor, which means I've been overly trained to be up here and to be ready with almost a running argument, if you will. And this kind of, for me, invitation to have a contemplative conversation. Again, whether we name that we're pausing or not, for me, is always going to be infused with this energy of something. And again, for me, to use language it's its own contemplative challenge. We are first inheritors of this beautiful way of communicating, without which we wouldn't be able to do this at all, and constricted by it. It's a language that was not created less necessarily by us for us. And it doesn't capture fully so much of what it means to be alive. And that's all of that said. We're doing the best we can here. And always for me, a certain kind of tender compassion arises from recognizing the challenges that human beings have when we come together from our radically different points of view and perspectives, even the two of us, right? Even the two of us who feel so allied and kind of aligned in so many ways. Obviously, if we stop and unpack our particular lived experience, it's just going to be so radically and beautifully different and differentiated, right? So I'd love to. I feel like we could help do a whole talk that's really about unpacking the kinds of opportunities that I think for both of us, this sort of contemplative social justice education and practice invitation presents, right? Opportunities to really slow down, yes, for the purposes of more deeply understanding and more deeply embodying the moments of our lives, to resource ourselves in an ongoing way, so that we minimize, right, the, the tendency that happens for all of us who engage in this work to get burned out,
Yeah.
to feel overwhelmed, to take on more and more and more. There's always more and more and more to do. So for me, as some of you know from my writings, a first approximation of what racial justice or any kind of justice looks like is kind of right here. How are we with ourselves and with each other? Are we just taking basic care of ourselves and each other?
Yeah.
And from that place, looking more deeply at who's vulnerable here, how and why that is so,
Yeah.
and what we might do to kind of disrupt. What are the many things we might do, frankly, because there's never really one way, it seems to me, to start disrupting these patterns of suffering. And so I think you and I both, in our own different ways, you know, I was born in North Carolina in 1967. I don't mind putting that year out there. I'm honoring every year I'm here at this point in terms of, recognizing, wanting to name the arc of time that I have been on the planet, in the United States cultural context, the last year of Martin Luther King's birth, me then helping desegregate the South, going to the University of Virginia School of Law and Graduate School of Sociology, at a time when there were hardly any Black professors, hardly anybody talking about white supremacy in history, and really finding myself in law school feeling drawn to create opportunities for first for myself to survive that place and time, and to survive all the questions, to work with all the questions that were coming up for me. Like, where is this history, and where is it, even though it's not being named? How is it still relevant? How does the history of, so to say, my people, African Americans in this context, intersect with the suffering of other differently racialized, differently oppressed people in this context, in the American context? What does history tell us about all of those things? And how might we, as students and practitioners of law and other forms of social justice, of course, now, how might we, by contemplating history and contemplating the imperatives of history, continually be engaged with these projects of what might be called Reconstruction, Reformation, Liberation. And so I wanted to just hear a little bit more from you, because, I've been recently posting a little bit about a paper I wrote almost 30 years ago on reparations. In which I set a historical context for that, and then made the case for, let us think about why the law has been so somehow blind to thinking about reparations as a proper remedy for this. Like, let's just sit with this. And again, seeing the connection between that and indigenous people's struggles, that and, Japanese American, Jewish heritage people, many, many different struggles of these sorts, but historically contextualized as a base for a call toward what can we do today to repair and to heal. And so, again, because of the work that you're doing around 400 years of inequality, I know how deeply our particular ways, at least on those strains. So I wanted to hear more about how you came to this project, and how you come to hold the relevance of contextualized historicization, history, as real in a certain sense, and not only back then and there, but right here, right now. How you have formulated a way of centering on that as part of really your distinctive and brilliant contribution.
Thank you for that, sis. And I want to just honor your historical and biographical trajectory in terms of how you show up to this call and to the work that you do. And to just say that we are our ancestors' wildest dreams. The fact that we're through Zoom having this conversation. So thank you for being you. Very quickly, in terms of how I come to this work, I spent a decade working in the field of kind of college access and readiness and leadership development in the context of helping underserved communities with preparing young people to get access to higher ed. there was a big push to get kids into college, right? And then through college, and then into careers. And then I noticed that, teachers were burning out. I noticed that school budgets were very slim. I noticed that the system, the structures that were still in place were replicating so much dysfunction. So I decided to pursue a doctorate in curriculum and teaching, and with a particular focus of thinking about social justice partly, and then mindfulness. Well, what are the tensions there? This conversation we're having, right? What are the tensions between inner work and outer work? How can they be reconciled? And through that work, I worked with colleagues at the New School with the 400 Years of Inequality Project that designed a wonderful, almost 4 by 20 foot timeline that allows people to kind of just walk through this 4 centuries and see very vividly through images and text how the American experiment has reproduced really interesting things in terms of its structures and forms of socially and federally and statewide governance. But what we see is with the arrival of enslaved Africans to Jamestown in 1619, and folks can debate that date, or I'm not here for that. I'm here to say that arrival, that continued reproduction of that practice into the ideological and economic foundations of the slave trade, and combined with the dispossession of Native and First Peoples of their land, what the timeline shows that it created a unique set of conditions where we begin to entrench legally and socially inequality that not just hits African Americans, not just hits indigenous folks, but also women, also poor white laborers, also LGBTQIA and trans folks. So how I sit with this is really inviting people to slow down enough to sit with this in order to be able to visibly see the system for how it works and how it reproduces itself, and then also see how it lives inside of oneself. So that's kind of the deepest work that I've been able to do. And the gift from that is that it's been able to allow me to slow down enough where I can have conversations with people who have very opposing views to me, and me not have the reactivity that I would have had before. So there's enough space for us to meet at least halfway.
Yes.
And ponder, how do we stop that reproduction? And that's where the healing, I think, for me comes in. Of course, it's leveled, right? Reconciliation and all those, and then reparation being one of them. But I think we have the skill set and the language already, and the conditions in place to have a really healthy conversation about it.
Really? You think we have the skill set and the language already, my dear?
Not all. Yeah. It's a law. It's definitely an ethos and a compass.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I want to, obviously keep us in this, in a real lively way. I have to say, when I hear you say we have the skill set and the language, I got a part of me that's like, absolutely, and that's what we're here to amplify. We can do this, right? I mean, because we meet this topic often with such a sense of almost defeatedness before we begin. It's too big, it's too painful, right? We know we've seen the legacies of that. Like, let's just quickly, call it a truce and move forward from here, because we feel we don't have the capacity to do it. And so like you, I believe, obviously, we have capacity, we have skills. This is why we're here. And the challenge is to really turn the skills that we have and the capacities that we have toward this really discomforting, really painful, really triggering reflection on this history and the way it lives in us today, and with that invitation toward our agentic, our ability to make change right here, right now, to change, really, to kind of, to start again but not to try and rush that process or try to leap over this moment's call to really know from which we begin. Like, know, right? All of that history and how it's still in us, right? And so for me, I'll just say the book that I wrote has been my effort to do something very similar to what you have done in this sense. You know, I wrote this book after having been teaching classes around race and American legal history. And so let me just pause and say that again, like race, racism, and American legal history, not only African-American experience, but really looking at how the law in its various articulated policies, pronouncements, restrictions on rights and opportunities through the dispossession of the land from indigenous people. Mm-hmm. Yes, look at the law and policy that, and the stereotypical narratives that went with that.
Yeah.
Of, you know, savage on the one hand, civilized on the other.
Yeah.
The law, policies, and practices of enslavement.
Yeah.
The privileging of whites in the process of enslavement and in immigration history.
Yeah.
The intersection of gender with all of that.
Mm.
And class, the kind of the tensions that run through this white supremacist economic and social project as it relates to profiteering in a capitalist system.
Yep.
The way the law kind of, you know, moves along in concert, protecting interests of the powerful. Mm-hmm. Institutionalizing the idea of whites as privileged vis-a-vis others for hundreds and hundreds of years. Mm-hmm. And so we look at case law going back to, you know, the 1800s in deference and reference to 1619, the 1600s and 1700s and those periods in the pre-constitutional era. Before, right, enact the Constitution. But then the first immigration law, whereby you had to be white to be a naturalized citizen. So just to name those as what we try to do over a 14-week period, and of course beyond through Brown versus Board and through contemporary case law and profiling and all that. Try and do that over 14 weeks. Yeah. Looking at African Americans, Latinos under law, indigenous, et cetera, and looking at it through an intersectional lens. So somewhere around 2005, I realized that I was having a kind of a crisis. Continuing to do that work required me to draw on my own practice, yoga, journaling, deepen the bit of introduction I'd had. Really, I still feel like I'm always a lifelong student around mindfulness and other contemplative practices. And I really felt like that was the only way I was able to open up a classroom of brand new students from all walks of life in San Francisco, different countries, continents, histories. Sit us around the table for 14 weeks, semester after semester, looking at 400 years of pain in law as a preparation for them to go out today and try to make a difference. I felt I needed to do something I had been doing something to enable me to do it, my contemplative practice. Yeah. And I really felt like if I couldn't bring that more forward into conversation with my students, that we were all missing something. So creating spaciousness in my classrooms over, for me, that 14-week inquiry into the same kind of what I love about your work, brother, is you're like saying, we can come together and look at 400 years of history in some hours. But it's just like, I've like been trying to do that over a time. Either way, we've both been infusing contemplative practice as a container. Yeah. Got these different, modalities for it. And so I know, and again, I think it's beautiful that we have our own different projects around this, yours being this immersion experience. Yeah. I'm being an immersion experience so far over 14 weeks. And now with the book, I'm inviting people into book clubs, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So I think our work together underscores no one way. And B, again, we both, I think, are really deeply see and understand and invite others into this process of looking at history deeply with the support of contemplation and compassion practices. Yeah. But here's my question for you. Like, where do you see the edges in this work? Where do you see um, hmm, like the next level of challenge, or we could say either challenge or opportunity here.
Yeah.
Where do you see patterns of persistent, like if there's a wall, if there are
Yeah.
walls that come up in the work as you see it so far, because I see some all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course.
What are those walls and how are you trying to navigate them right now?
Yeah, and I want to suggest that the launch of this forum is kind of almost an exploration of that wall, right? Both sides of it, where the work of many of the Garrison Institute's colleagues are doing the work, and then the other side of that wall, what are we dreaming up? What can we conjure as possible projects, conversations that enliven possibilities? So in terms of this forum, and I want to say that the spirit of it is within that question.
Mhm.
I see several different walls and challenges and edges. The first is one of consciousness, obviously, right? There's a continuum. People stand at different points. Communities stand at different points in that spectrum, which leads to all kinds of misunderstandings, all kinds of different lived experiences and perceptions of what's happening. Um, and we're also dealing with a historical moment where there's a lot of divisiveness and polarization. So there's this clear edge in terms of us not all being there and ready to, as you said earlier, have this conversation or have some kind of reckoning.
Mhm.
Um, and then also there's the force, a historical force that meets us now, where COVID-19 just kind of really integrates itself as a real phenomenon in terms of like folks literally organizing and going out to the streets to respond to police violence, right? And then the tensions that come with that. So the first wall is one of the first challenge and edge is consciousness. And is it even possible to have massive experiences of folks elevating their consciousness to, and then, I think we've seen some of that happen recently as far as like folks like, whoa, coming to see how some of our most vulnerable citizens are treated by those who are sworn to protect. And then we've seen that kind of awakening of consciousness happen in history, in terms of the civil rights and the Black struggles. But that's been very vivid. When I say earlier that in terms of my optimism, and my very kind of gentle suggestion that we do have the skill set and the language, I want to kind of respond to that because it just brings up so much tension and conversation. And part of you and I being contemplatives, we can go in there, we can get in.
Yeah.
So like, I uniquely think that we are in an interesting point. I know it feels really tense right now, but I mean, we are in the fourth industrial revolution right now, where the digital and the information revolution from the dot-com boom has incredibly just created so much opportunity and wealth. We also come at a point where technology has exponentially increased in ways that over the last 100 years pale in comparison from the last 2000. So in terms, it's just an interesting moment with all this research coming out in terms of the neuroplasticity of the brain, all kinds of language,
There's also digital divide,
say it again.
right? That digital divide, right?
Yes.
No.
Yeah. So it's a complicated thing. It's a complicated thing. So when I allude that we may have the language and the skill sets, I mean that we're at a saturation point where, we either get it or we don't, on the one hand, partly, maybe there's more space there. There's more space there. But part of this conversation is looking at that.
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
then, so I think that one of the most clear edges is one of consciousness and people's understandings and levels of being able to come together and have conversations that lead to changing actual policy, law, structures, and the community, the fabric of community. Yeah, and so that's one, in my humble opinion, but I'd love to hear what you think. I have a couple other things, but I do think that it's a unique opportunity that's unfolding before us. So I'm glad to be part of this forum.
Me too. Me too. So glad. Because again, we're just getting started. We're just, in this one
Hmm.
relatively like infinitesimal small conversation, right? In the grand scheme of things,
Yeah.
we're never going to be able to unpack it all or really, open it all up. So I with the spirit of like, jazz or improvisation that is also part of our beautiful history and legacy, leaning into our, my heritage, our heritage as Americans.
Yeah.
We're kind of improvising. We are in a moment of adapting to new realities, including the tech that you've described. This is
Hmm.
a revolution that has happened in my lifetime. And every day I'm sort of like, ooh, can I adapt? Like, wait, what's Slack? Like, what,
Zoom
something.
life.
Yeah. Um, and I live right here in San Francisco Bay Area. My partner's a patent lawyer, right? This is part of my reality, this tech revolution in a very concrete way. And it's a revolution in the sense that I grew up, with a grandmother still using that kind of turning washing machine kind of thing with it, right? With it was your
Yeah.
hand crank actually to wring clothes out and a clothesline, right? With almost no technology, even the basics still in the house. So that arc is very, very real for me in the sense of some of us have more access to certain types of resources and skills
Yeah.
than others.
Yeah.
And I want to amplify what you're saying about consciousness generally,
Yeah.
that it is kind of both a barrier and we're seeing moments of opportunity. The consciousness is shifting partly because experience is causing us all to realize our interconnectedness, our vulnerability in this moment,
Hmm.
radical vulnerability we all feel. And then you add visuals from the technological world of just extreme, dehumanizing
Yeah.
behavior that we just
Yeah.
all just rise up against.
Yeah.
And that felt experience does so much more than, 30 years of talking about
Yeah.
race inequality,
Yeah.
even with the last 10 years of sitting together and holding space and meditating. Nothing can shift consciousness, perhaps. For me, I think it's one of the ways I think about the edge. Part of the edge is, for me, our lived experiences are
Hmm.
all still very segregated, still
Hmm.
very, we're all in these systems and they're in us in a very real way.
Yeah.
So that even as we try to break free intellectually and through practice in terms of seeing the radical interconnectedness and seeing the constructedness of race and difference and gender, and, wanting to be all of us to have more freedom, we still live in these systems that are
Yeah.
constantly constructing and reconstructing, and they're constantly trying to define and redefine.
Yeah.
For me, that is how that's one of the ways I'm kind of grappling with, trying to turn toward a particular aspect that I see of the challenge. That is, again, the reality of us being in these systems that we're also trying to change,
Yeah.
and having to be, to perform according to and conform to some degree to the dictates of these systems.
Hmm.
Having to some extent to be more complicit perhaps with them than we might want.
Mm.
And so a lot of things come up for me when I see those dynamics in play, like, the complicity, the fragility, the inability, the unskillfulness is kind of learned and constructed, and the learning and training around inability to come together,
Mm.
inability to make common cause seems very, energetic. Like, so here
Yeah.
we are trying to energetically intervene with something positive.
Yeah.
It seems, as we all know, the energetics of the other
Yeah.
kind of way of being, right? In sociology, we talk about how societies are always involved in projects either of egalitarianism, trying to bring societies, groups. You can always identify,
Yeah.
right? Some projects of altruistic, let's all come together on one hand, and
Yeah.
at the same time, projects of hierarchy and oppression.
Yeah.
And so it then becomes about like choosing as best we can how to be engaged in, for me, projects of liberation,
Yeah.
but also recognizing I'm just this one soft belly being in the midst of a set of systems that I didn't create that are
Hmm.
interlocking all the time, and I'm sort of, buffeted against,
Mm.
whether it's about sexism and how it's showing up
Yeah.
even in amongst communities of color, and let's say within the Black community.
Yeah.
So it just is one right place where it's like really real to kind of disrupt these systems, even when we are, trying really hard. So I guess for me, the daylight, one of the green shoots is that I think mindfulness practice and the way of being in the world that comes from that
Yeah.
is such a profound aid for resiliently dealing with cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
Like, wow, the way you see it is really different from the way I see it.
Yeah.
I still completely, fully honor your beauty, your humanity, the awesomeness,
Yeah.
like the magnificence of your life expression.
Yeah.
All those dimensions of that, even if, so I can be present to disagreement and notice my reactivity, but also at the same time access the dimension of like, no, we are forms of life that we didn't create and couldn't. So that's all that needs to be brought to this at the same time. So that's one way I think about the edginess and the way that these practices and our commitments that we're drawing on right here, right now, can be a real rich support for navigating it all.
Thank you for that, sis.
Well, as you can see, I've rejoined you.
Yay.
It's been an absolutely stimulating conversation. I so enjoy listening to the two of you and the enthusiasm that you bring. It's remarkable. And for both of you, this is just the beginning. This is, and we've talked about this, and I'm going to lean on both of you to help us evolve these conversations and continue this forum on social justice around a number of different issues and speakers, and like I said, I'm going to lean on you to help us with that.
And
Angel,
we're going to be leaning right on back, my dear, right? So we
right.
know that you all have a lot of resources to bring.
Absolutely. So Angel, I wanted to, before I turn, we have a number of questions here, but I'm just going to go back to your point about consciousness and about a conversation that the three of us had prior to this, in terms of my own frustrations around the 60s and 70s, where we felt we were bringing about real change, and yet we didn't go far enough. So in this elevated state of consciousness, Angel, that you're talking about, do you both think that this is an opportunity for us actually to bring about real change?
I'm not the first, nor is Rhonda, to feel that question in this moment in time. It, as Dr. Cornel West talks about, there is progress and there is regress. This is an opportunity that can split both ways. I think it's an opportunity where, some really powerful conversations are happening to tilt towards some serious change in the realm of consciousness and in the realm of practice and policy. But as Rhonda reminds us, that the contentious and maybe kind of opposing nature of the moment in terms of communities that might not necessarily agree make it somewhat difficult for a complete kind of overhaul. But I think that it's a cultural contestation. We're kind of debating and really contesting the idea of what a world that is different looks like. So for me, I think yes, but that's going to look different across different communities. So that's my immediate response.
Right. Do you have something to add to that, or should I move on to the questions from the audience?
Well, maybe just to shift to the questions from the audience, and we can kind of keep amplifying this as part of the theme in the response.
I'm sensitive to the fact that Angel has to actually leave us a little early. So the first question that I'm going to ask is I'm going to direct at Angel. And it's from Catherine Goldman Schuler, who says, knowing about Rhonda's work in education at the university level, could Angel speak about his work in bringing contemplative elements into the schools with younger children, and what both see as to how these children can perhaps influence their homes and families?
Yeah, I'll just quickly say, bring in the work of Otto Scharmer from MIT here, when he talks about in order for the system to change, it needs to be able to see itself. And part of what the work that we've been doing with younger children, but also community folks, is giving them the opportunity to see the system in terms of how it kind of has unfolded. And what we've learned from that is that it does create a more spaciousness and full stability to what we call metabolize history. So really take in what kind of transpired and make sense of it in terms of how it's either happening again or how it shows up interpersonally in your relationships or in your relationship with yourself. So I think we're still working more with younger children, but for the students we've worked with and for the community leaders and folks we've worked with, it just really helps to provide folks with a re-education of American history. So it's promising.
Right. And if I may add, I know that Catherine, I see her question asks further. She talks about how you can have shifts in consciousness, perhaps with children, or children have a certain consciousness coming out of contemplative learning and experience, but then there might be tension between that and protest. I personally don't see there necessarily being tension between contemplation and protest. You know, I think for me anyway, and I think this is why we have this conversation and we come together in communities of practice to reflect together on how my experience of this, what it looks like from here versus yours, Catherine, and any others, Angel, Jonathan, others. For me, contemplation opens up the possibility of the full spectrum of experience being something we can handle, the whole range. It disrupts all of the trainings around how we have to be nice, how we have to look a certain way, how our tone has to be. Although I understand all of that, right? It seems to me there are these levels of engagement with what the practice is asking of us. So yes, to pause and to notice our reactivity, but that in and of itself is not meant to squelch the energy of our rage. The energy of our rage is I would say, to use the language of God, for those who appreciate that language or for those who don't, let's just say it's an energetic expression of something profoundly neurobiologically gift work, right? This is a gift of us to help us discern, right?
Yeah.
Something in our world needs to change, when our values need clarification, when we are feeling something, something that's just kind of not right, and we're struggling with how to fix it, how to resolve it. So I think contemplation is less about, forming us into kind of pacified beings who can always with a smile confront whatever comes. Sometimes that it's not going to be a smile. Sometimes it's going to be an expression of, the loud ouch, the loud yell of, no more, enough.
Yep.
I think of that knee on the neck of our brother George Floyd.
Yes.
What I feel like we're all reacting to is like, absolutely not anymore, no more, enough. And we don't want that reactivity, and that sort of absolutely not is a rage response. We know this. And while, this isn't a justification to say, feel all your anger and act on it. It is, for me, contemplation isn't that. It is a way of sort of feeling the opportunity to transform something strong like anger into wisdom. And how we do that is a practice, and it can be on the fly, and it can be the rest of our lives really learning how to do that well together.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Rhonda.
Yeah, thank you. That's very, very well put. I have a question from Shanti Grace. How can people in general understand how to open the space that makes real conversation and reconciliation possible down on the ground, to find common ground?
Yeah, before I head out, I'd say that you have to start with yourself in terms of readying your spirit, readying your kind of body, because as Rhonda alluded, this is a kind of a neurobiological process. I know Dr. Daniel Siegel talks about the science of interconnection, but that stuff is real. When you enter a space, when you bring people together, Peter Senge and his colleagues call it a social field. You're activating a social field, right? So like vibes, you know, all that stuff has now, because of the wave of scientific studies, we can quantify and look at how, you know, people's energy and even a felt sense of how community is cultivated in the classroom, and how the practitioner has so much to do with the lived experience of the classroom, right? So really start with yourself. Make sure your spirit is settled enough, because, you know, I appreciate my sister for the power of contemplation, for, you know, reducing our reactivity, and also the tension between having that reactivity, managing it, and yet not let it spill over. But there are times when the anger and the energy that spills over is useful, but with the readiness and the kind of self-work, you can work with that. And for me, I do that all the time. I mean, this conversation has me kind of really working with my anger and channeling it through my love for my sister Rhonda and my support for the Garrison Institute. But I really want to push and seed this conversation as a container for exploring the complexities of this conversation, including the anger, including the joy. So really start with yourself, and really try to create a space where people feel at home, really, literally at home, and seen.
Brother, we know you have to sign off. We don't
Yeah.
want to interfere with your other important responsibilities.
I will see you. It was a pleasure.
And until the next piece of the conversation.
Make sure you subscribe to this YouTube
Angel,
channel.
thank you so much. Rhonda, the very first question we got was directed at you, so we'll go ahead and read that. It's from Jean Vitrano, who says that she's happy to share that members of her local Sangha are about to participate in a book group around your book. So Professor Magee, and I wonder if you have a suggestion about how we can structure the discussion in the Zoom meeting, given that they're going to read one section at a time, and they wish to have open, safe conversations about what arose in each of us. Now, I think to some degree, you address that in the book, where you know, at the end of each chapter sort of have some of that laid out, but maybe you could respond more specifically to Jean.
Right, and I see my response, and what I will say is linking and amplifying what my brother Angel just said as he was leaving, about how our practices are the foundation for it, our personal commitment to practice, the knowledge, the confidence that we can bring from our practice, that when we are sitting in that quote unquote hot seat, or taking the loving responsibility to create a container for engagement in a deep way and find common ground around these issues, it can be challenging. It will be, if you're really sort of looking at these issues together from our radically differentiated paths into the conversation onto the Zoom call. There will be difficulty, right? There will be ways that we are misunderstanding each other. There will be people criticizing some aspect or another. There will be us feeling inadequate. There will be us being reminded of our privileges, or the way in which we're not mindful of this or that. So our own personal practice is always the foundation. And yes, I do in my book, the first part of the book, so those of you who are looking at it know it starts with this invitation to grounding. So grounding, yes, in the sense that Angel was just describing in our own practice, grounding in the neuroscience, being curious about learning more about how it is that we can develop more robust and resilient social spaces for engagement, and how we can do that even on Zoom. So, you know, in the book, I talk about ways that you can invite reflection, for example, on the agreements you want to make. How do we want to be in this conversation? How do we want to meet each other here? And how do we want to stay engaged in some sort of accountability around some of these agreements that we make? I guess for me, yes, I've written about this, and so I have more to say there. But I guess the underlying piece is about seeing all of this as practice. It's not about performing or demonstrating that you already have it together and you read the books in a certain sort of way and therefore you're, you know, one step ahead. It is that. We obviously want you to read and think and be there from all of that place of skillful preparation, and to be engaged with our own defenses against vulnerability, our own call toward a certain kind of humble reflection on where we get stuck too. And to be able to have these Zoom meetings around the book be this kind of cultivation of a loving community as best we can for working together to deepen our ability to be with reality, including the realities that come through our identities. And that to me is a love project, like my brother was mentioning, at the end of the day. It all, like Colin Kaepernick says, we resist, we do this work. Martin Luther King said the same thing. I see it in the work of people as disparate from this conversation as Duke Ellington and LL Cool J. Like, we do these things out of love. We try to wake ourselves up and each other up because we care, because we love each other, and when we feel honestly that there's been too much suffering already. We want to try to close it out on our watch as best we can. But we realize with some humility that this is a we project. We can't end any suffering by ourselves. And we were born into these projects that cause a lot of pain. We will die with projects unfinished whenever that moment comes. So can we, as we go, work together with some fellow feeling, some loving ability to be together that is itself a manifestation of our commitment to justice.
That's beautiful. That's very beautiful. Thank you. And I unfortunately have the task of also drawing this to a close. So I want to thank you for your participation, and we look forward to many others. I want to thank everybody who joined us today. And please keep checking our website, which is www.garrisoninstitute.org, for updated listings on future sessions. And to view the recording of this, it'll also be on our website as well. And again, all of these sessions are offered free of charge. If you'd like to support us and support this programming, please consider making a donation. And Rhonda, thank you again so much. I'm so honored to have you here. So,
thank you. Jonathan, thank you, and to all who are here, thank you for your presence. If we haven't gotten to your question, I know myself and Angel will continue to reflect on them. We'll get a copy of the questions and we'll take them, and they will infuse our work going forward. We hope to meet you somewhere along the way, whether through Garrison or otherwise. We're out there. So thank you. And I just want to invite, as we close, just a pausing, sensing what is alive in us as a result of our having spent this unrepeatable time together. It has mattered. So thank you. Honoring you, honoring this work, honoring the moments we have for the rest of our lives to see what we can make of them together. And I thank you.
Great.
For being.
Thank you. And I see lots of thank yous coming through as well. So great.
Thank you, my dear. Thanks, everybody. Be well.
There we go. You still here? Yeah. Monique, Michael.
My video has stopped. I don't know if my audio.
No. Oh, I think everything's